Hello everyone and welcome to our podcast. I'm Dr. Kirsten Gibson. I'm an early music scholar specialising on music in early modern England, ranging from the 16th century up through to the early 18th century. And I'm also head of music at Newcastle University.
And I'm Dr. Stephanie Carter. I have a PhD in 17th century music print culture from the University of Manchester, and I'm working on the music trade in early modern England.
So Stephanie and I have been doing research over the last few years into music making in early modern Newcastle upon Tyne. And since we're making this podcast for early music at Newcastle, we thought it'd be really nice to share some of our research findings with you and to give you an insight into musical life in Newcastle. So what we're going to do in this little podcast is we're going to take you through some of the primary source materials we've been working with over the last few years to give you a sense of the kind of picture we're able to build up about musical activity in Newcastle. And then we're going to move on to look at three particular case studies, three particular primary sources that give us really good insight into the print trade, the music print trade in Newcastle, and also into recreational music making, particularly amongst the community of hostmen in the town.
So there are various sources that provide tantalising glimpses of evidence of recreational music making and markets for printed music in Newcastle. Some, such as music manuscripts and printed books, are not as obvious as others. We've looked at probate documents for evidence of instruments and books. So, for example, Tristram Heron of Newcastle, who died in 1584, owned a lute, a case, and 4 lute books. There are many inventories, including viols, violins, and virginals for gentlemen, lawyers, hostmen, merchants, barber surgeons, bakers, and brewers, indicating a lively music scene in the merchant class of Newcastle. In the probate documents, there was also an inventory from a Newcastle bookseller, William Corbett, who died in 1626, who owned 2 shops in the town, and his inventory includes psalms in 4 parts for sale in Newcastle. Parish registers include records such as William Smith, who died in 1646, who was described as a virginals teacher and musician. But today we're going to look at 3 case studies showcasing recreational music making in the town between 1650 and 1750, a printed book, a manuscript of music, and a diary.
The first source we want to introduce you to is William London's A Catalogue of the Most Vendable Books in England. And this is a catalogue of books being sold, we're told, on the title page of this publication, from William London's shop in Newcastle. And this catalogue of books was published in 1657. And we have additional evidence, not just the book itself, that tells us exactly where William London's shop was located, because we know from the Newcastle upon Tyne Council minutes that William London's shop was indeed located on the old Tyne Bridge. So this is a catalogue of books that London tells us he is selling from his shop in Newcastle, and there are over 3,000 titles listed in this catalogue. And we're told by scholars that actually this catalogue, if William London was actually stocking all of these books, makes his shop one of the largest collections of books in the country. So, for example, C.J. Hunt says that if London was selling all of the books listed, his was, quote, probably the most extensive stock of any north of England bookseller before the 18th century. And John Barnard and Margaret Bell tell us that, quote, if the titles listed in London's catalogue really represented books he had in his stock, then he operated on a larger scale than any other 17th century provincial bookseller we have found. So it's a very large stock of books. So what about music? Well, amongst those 3,500 titles listed, there are 15 music books listed in London's catalogue that contain musical notation. And there are an additional 3 books in the catalogue that contain psalm, hymn or song texts that would have been related to musical practice. So those books range across psalm books. That's the most voluminous type of book that's listed, music book that's listed in London's catalogue. But also we have beginner instrumental books, which are very clearly aimed at the amateur market. And we have music theory books, we have sacred songs, secular songs, consort music, and music for dancing. So John Playford's very, very popular publication, The Dancing Master, is included in William London's catalogue. So this catalogue was aimed for readers to be able to see what London stocked, what books were available, and to give them a really clear sense of what was in each book. And you might note that I said when I was quoting those scholars about the size of the collection in the catalogue, scholars are saying if London was stocking all of these books. And indeed, what Steph and I have done in terms of our research is we have looked at the way in which William London listed the titles in this catalogue, because it's conceivable he could have enlarged his catalogue by drawing on other book catalogues, for example, or from advertisements in books. Often in the 17th century, at the front or the back of a publication would have a list of other books by that particular publisher. And what we found was that the way in which William London lists the books, giving almost the full titles, sometimes giving the full titles in great detail, is far more detailed than what you would find in a normal catalogue or an advertisement. So there is really good evidence to suggest that these books were at some point on the shelves of William London's bookshop. The significance of this is that it tells us that by the mid-17th century, consumers in Newcastle and in the wider region were able to quite easily acquire fashionable, up-to-date music publications emanating from the London press. And the fact that London included these music books in his catalogue also indicates that London perceived there to be a market for such publications in the local community.
So we have music books for sale in Newcastle in the middle of the 17th century. And now we're going to move on to Henry Atkinson's Tune Book, which is a manuscript book of music from 1694 that shows us the sorts of things that a Newcastle-based merchant was playing. Now, Henry Atkinson was the son of a Gateshead yeoman and was admitted as a member of the Company of Hostmen, that is, those people in Newcastle involved in the coal trade, in February 1694, so the same year that he starts his manuscript book. There are various tunes in the book, including pieces that were published in various Playford music books, although not necessarily copied directly, popular ballads and tunes, Scottish and Geordie tunes, London theatre tunes, and also teaching directions. So at the back of the book is recorded Atkinson's eagerness to learn the basics of music literacy and suggests self-directed study. There are basic instructions on notation, pitch, note values, and finger placement on the violin, and very similar instructions can be found in printed tutor books, such as Playford's Introduction to the Skill of Music, which William London was selling in Newcastle in the 1650s. And the manuscript also shows Atkinson's progress in learning music, because there are numerous copying errors, such as wrong quaver groupings and erratic bar lines, and errors that are so extreme in places that the tunes are actually incoherent. There are at least 8 different hands writing music in the book in no particular order, which suggests that Atkinson was part of a community sharing and copying tunes together. Now, 50 years on, we have another excellent case study showing lots of live music making in Newcastle in the 1750s. And this comes from Ralph Jackson's diaries. Jackson was an apprentice to another hostman in the 1750s, living on the quayside in Newcastle, and actually refers to old Mr. Henry Atkinson in his diaries. Now, Ralph Jackson was given a gift of a German flute for Christmas in 1751 by a family friend, and from that point onwards, he becomes immediately eager to gain musical ability. Music gives Jackson a community of friends and associates in Newcastle, many of whom shared common occupations such as apprentice and merchants. Like Atkinson, Jackson sought to consolidate and increase his musical knowledge, writing a dictionary of music words. Jackson's diaries also give us significant detail of various music transactions in 18th century Newcastle. He received music from his sister Rachel in Richmond. He sent music back to Richmond. He regularly copied out music, purchasing music and accessories in Newcastle shops, and experienced frequent private, informal musical gatherings made up of friends, associates, family members, and members of his master's family. So these three case studies shed significant light on recreational music making in Newcastle from the late 17th to the mid 18th centuries, documenting musical tastes and education, with Newcastle merchants consuming and engaging in both literate national culture and also localised tastes and practices.